Hey everyone, and welcome to Generative Now. I am Michael Mignano. I'm a partner at Lightspeed, and this week on the podcast, I spoke with Andrew Mason, the CEO and founder of Descript, the AI-powered media editing platform. This super popular product can count some of the most popular podcasts as its users, including this very own show. And OpenAI led a $50 million funding round for Descript in 2022. This summer, Descript has rolled out a new suite of AI-powered features bundled into a tool they call Underlord. Andrew and I talked about Descript's unique approach to audio and video editing and the future of media creation in a world with AI. So check it out. Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Mike.
Thanks for doing this.
It's my pleasure. So nice to see you and get to spend this time together.
So one cool thing about this conversation that you know, but for the audience's sake, is we're talking on Descript Rooms. And this is like your solution for capturing podcast videos and interviews. Is that right?
Yes, it's like our third or fourth attempt at a solution, but I think like the final solution that we were that is the correct one. So we just launched it, but yeah, it'll be rolling out over the next several weeks.
Yeah, it's awesome. One of the first thing I noticed about it, which I really like, is that the interface is white. I find that a lot of the other products for this, they're all dark, and that actually darkens your face, right? Like you're running a podcast, you want to be like lit up and you want to have like good lighting, but then you launch these tools and it just like darkens everything. So that was the first thing I noticed about Rooms.
Yeah, I think it does have dark mode for those people that would rather be dark. But Descript is a lighter UI, so
yeah. One of the interesting things I thought about this when I heard we were using this and I heard about the feature is I feel like you and I have been talking about Descript for years. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of the product, especially given my love and experience with podcasts. But I feel like Descript has always walked this fine line of being really, really good for podcasts, but also really good for other things. And Rooms kind of, to me, is Descript saying like, we are a podcast tool. Is that, have you thought about that, or have you thought about like that statement with this tool?
We think of Descript as a horizontal creation tool. People will often try to pigeonhole us in terms of whether we're for podcasting or whether we're from video. We obviously started out with audio podcasting, and we just divide up the tool space a little bit differently. We think you're either making narrative media that's driven by speech, or you're making like music. And there should be one tool for making narrative media. And it shouldn't be specific to audio or video or unscripted podcasts versus a scripted like creator style video or explainer or something. And then we think of remote recording, what we're doing with Rooms, as kind of table stakes for a modern creation tool, right? It's like, it just stands to reason that if you're trying to build something that is collaborative, that you are going to include as part of that the ability to record multiple people at the same time. Podcasting is one of our biggest use cases. It's one of our strengths. A lot of people use Descript primarily for podcasting. But our hope is to build something that can span the full spectrum of audio and video creation. The trying to subdivide it into categories can be tricky and not something that users should have to think about too much, we don't think. So we just try to make a tool that works for everything.
That all makes a ton of sense. I obviously, like, podcasting is how I heard about Descript when I was building at Anchor and Spotify. But I know, because I hear from people all the time, that they're using it for a bunch of different things. You mentioned podcasts is still one of the biggest use cases. Like, what are the other forms of narrative media have you seen emerge as the biggest use cases?
Just broadly, it's podcasts, video content, and clips, where clips is taking longer things and then pulling highlights and cutting them down into stuff that you're distributing as promotional content on social media. Video content is inclusive of a bunch of businesses making videos for content marketing or support, that sort of thing. And then obviously like creators making it for their YouTube channel or even shorts.
Speaking of shorts, the clips thing has gotten crazy. Like I feel like there's this thing going on in the world right now where the clips is kind of more important than the long form, at least in like, in terms of like public consumer facing content. Like, have you all started to think about it in that way at all?
It's a hugely popular use of Descript. And what surprised me is the degree to which people will use Descript and other tools like it to load in a video and just simply add a burned-in captions layer or something like that. Like, we're going through an interesting time where I think there are people using tools for extremely thin benefits that will get consolidated one way or the other. But it's like the sole job to be done of a subscription that they have right now might be like adding a captions layer onto a video that they edit entirely somewhere else.
You mean the tools get consolidated that they're paying for, they're subscribing for, or
For sure.
the types of content get consolidated into like one, suite?
I think the tools get consolidated. I assume that there will, like, clips will stick around for a while, but the idea that somebody's going to pay $20 a month for something that only lets them add a caption layer to a video, I don't think anybody thinks that's how it's going to be a couple of years from now.
Yeah, I mean, and it also it feels like the Apples of the world, the Googles of the world, like they're sprinkling more and more,
Exactly.
AI editing into their, tools that are baked into the OS. So yeah, I think that's actually a good point. I could see a lot of like the table stakes stuff just getting like sucked into Apple and Google workflows.
It's something that we've seen since we started Descript 7 years ago. I'm sure you saw this a lot with Anchor, is that you'll see these little kind of explosions of growth and activity around a particular job to be done. That's important, but there's a question of whether it in itself is a sustainable, it's actually like a standalone business, or it's just going to be something that's a feature that might eventually end up getting commoditized. And I think like the tricky job of the entrepreneur is to see through which ones are worth to go after and versus the things that you should just stay on course. And that's been just turned up 10x by the arrival of Gen AI and this explosion of little point solutions for different types of things.
Given that clips are becoming like a form of first-class content, like how much do you think about the platforms and how the platforms will need to evolve or should evolve to support this? Like clips sort of feel like a bit of a hack to me. Yeah. Like you want like the long form content is the primary content vehicle. And then we're sort of like hacking TikTok and Reels with these short things to drive consumption back to the long form thing. Like at what point should things just kind of merge on the platform side to support both, and it's just like one unit of content? Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a world where the concept of the clip is just a view setting or something like that, or like really like clips feel like the kind of thing that should be personalized, or could very well be personalized to the individual user based on what their interests are. When you're trying to build a video creation tool, how do you carve out something? How do you carve out like a category of video that you're going after where the value feels sustainable and unlikely to be subsumed by what platforms are doing? So we look at things like batch creation of 1,000 different videos for A/B testing ads or something like that as the kind of thing that it is unlikely to be a sustainable competitive advantage for us. And what we try to focus on is the type of video where craft and control tends to matter. Most creator videos and most videos on a business's YouTube page today, there's a degree of craft and choice, and that goes into that. It's really hard to imagine how AI is going to fully subsume that stuff anytime soon. There's definitely categories of video where Gen AI can drive the creation of those videos, especially like more emergent categories, videos that maybe previously would only make sense as a doc or a slide deck, for example. But a lot of the kinds of videos that are created today require a level of human touch, and that's where we think we're really strong.
That definitely resonates. Coincidentally, this morning I watched this. I don't know if you saw this video that Casey Neistat put out about this like fire hydrant, like fish pond in Brooklyn. Did you see this?
No.
It's amazing. You should watch it. The human touch, like, is all I actually, as I was watching it, I'm like, wow, like nobody could make this other than Casey. And I think in the world that you're talking about, it almost feels like premium content almost gets more premium. Like the best stuff is considered really, really good. And then there's probably some line where everything below it can just be commoditized by AI, right?
I'm finding it really hard to predict what the world is going to look like around this stuff in a year or two. 5 years ago, most people would blanch at the idea that they would one day be listening to audiobooks that were completely generated by AI speech, because it's really, really hard to imagine what it's going to be like once it crosses out of the uncanny valley and it actually feels good enough. And now we're basically living in that world where it's so good that you might not even know most of the time that you're listening to something that's synthetic. AI avatars, I think, are on the verge of entering a similar category. But then they're different because one could make a case that AI speech is utilitarian. There's a practical need to deliver content through the ears, but AI avatars actually isn't delivering information. It's just window dressing on the video, right? The information is coming from the speech. And so the choice to use synthetic human feels like a deliberate trick to force a sense of connection and authenticity. Once it gets good enough, will people feel the same way about it that they do with AI speech? I don't know. It's really hard to predict that kind of thing.
Maybe this is what you're getting at, but does it reach a point in which it's just so obvious that everything is synthetic, so we don't need to feel the forced fake human connection, and everything is just synthetic, and like there doesn't need to be a fake avatar, right? Just play the voice. I know it's a robot. It's like, I get it. You don't have to try to connect with me. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's wild. It's really interesting to see how much has been done with synthetic voices, synthetic videos, synthetic images, and be talking to you because I think Descript's one of the first companies, maybe the first company that I remember stepping foot into this world. You guys acquired a company, Lyrebird, back in the day that I was super familiar with because I wanted to partner with them at Anchor. And when I saw that you had acquired them and what you were hoping to do with it, it seemed like the future. It seemed like science fiction in a good way, in a cool way. And as you're saying, like now we are fully there. Every company's doing this.
And it's happening so fast too.
So AI for Descript has come a super long way. You started with Lyrebird, which what year was that? Was that like 5, 6, maybe even 8 years ago?
It was about 5 years ago. Yeah. Or 2020.
And now, you have Underlord, you have all these different AI features. What features, I guess, have made the biggest difference in either the creation of the content or the output of the content for Descript and its users?
We raised our Series C from OpenAI. And when we announced the Series C was maybe a month or two before ChatGPT was released in GPT-4. When we were working on the round, Sam Altman gave us a preview of it, and he framed it as, I'm going to give you access to this thing, and maybe half a dozen people have seen this, and all of them have completely changed their roadmap as a result of it.
That's wild. So this is ChatGPT?
Yeah, with GPT-4 in a ChatGPT-like experience. So our first version of it was we had like a Slack bot that was basically ChatGPT. sure enough, like we played with it and it was one of those things where you just never forget it, like the moon landing or 9/11 or something. And I don't know which analogy is going to prove to be more appropriate. We'll see. We, like everybody else, kind of rushed to think about what do we do with this? What do we do to take advantage of the technology that this alien that's just landed on Earth is going to provide for us? There's so much that we could do. And I think what we've learned with some distance is that the most important, impactful AI innovation for us to be focused on is the same old, boring, dumb one that kicked off Descript, which is fulfilling the promise of the text-based video editor, audio video editor. Like that is AI, right? We don't think of it that way as much anymore, but it was progress in automatic transcription and the phonetic alignment between text and audio that enabled the creation of a text-based audio video editor. And our ambition from the beginning has been to, like, if you could reinvent the interaction paradigm for video so that it feels like something like the gold standard of creation tools, which is the word processor, right? There's like no cognitive distance between an idea and its expression. If it's just so fast and intuitive, if you could pull that off for video, then you really unlock the medium. And getting that right is super, super hard. You have to figure out, like, if you think about it, text is a one-dimensional tool. Like you're either going forward or back with words. And video and timelines, a timeline editor that we're pulling from is two-dimensional. You have both time and then you have like a stack of layers. So you have to figure out how to kind of port everything over, working with one less visual dimension and representing that in this one-dimensional space, and make it feel completely natural and like it couldn't be any other way. And so a lot of that is just like good old-fashioned product work and design work. Like Descript is fundamentally a design idea that's propped up by technology that we're trying to prove. And all of the generative-based AI stuff is super transformative and important, and we have to do that as well. It's really easy to allow it to distract us from just fulfilling that core thing, which is what I think is the real unlock for Descript if we can pull that off.
Would you mind giving some examples of maybe like since ChatGPT, what are some of the aspects of that core vision of making audio and video text editable that have been changed by sort of the iterative innovations in AI since ChatGPT? Like, I get like speech to text, right? And now let's edit the text and let's convert it back into video. But like, how does each, subsequent version of GPT impact this? How do some of the other tools like, I don't know, Sora or generative video, like how does it get back to that core mission with each of these new innovations?
One of the most popular features we had before, which seems like trite these days, but before ChatGPT came along, was filler word removal. So you would record something, and then you'd click a button, and it would remove all your ums and uhs and likes and so on. And we had, plans to take that further and further. Oh, you could, if somebody does a scripted recording, you could remove what appear to be retakes. If somebody does an unscripted recording, you could remove kind of rambling diversions or stuff like that. And when ChatGPT came along and these LLMs, it was just like instant AI buffet for stuff like that, for kinds of auto editing of the script that it could do really well. So it was just like an accelerant on the stuff that we knew that we wanted to do. Some of the other stuff that we're working on now is like doing similar types of automatic editing, but on the visual layer. So storyboarding a video, dividing it up into different shots, and then filling those shots with content, A lot of tools do this already, but nothing's very good. And I think that speaks to it being still a relatively hard problem to do well. Some of that is the fact that most of the models are doing it are just looking at the script. They're not looking at the pixels on the screen. So as this stuff gets multimodal, the quality will get better. But there's also like, if you're just going through, a library of stock video to have kind of cheesy B-roll over your camera recordings or your audio recordings, it just feels kind of cheap. And that's what a lot of them seem like. So I think like we talk about that internally as window dressing. That's the term that we use to, like, if you think about a lot of video, this video is a good example of it. Like most of the information is actually being transmitted by audio, and the visuals are just there to keep people engaged and interested. Occasionally you'll show a chart or something, and that's actual information, but it's mostly window dressing. And I think figuring out how to create strong window dressing is still an unsolved, like nobody's done a really good job at that yet.
The multimodal stuff is super interesting. I'm glad you mentioned it. I was thinking about that a little bit earlier in the conversation, that I have to imagine everyone at the team right now, when they see, GPT-4o being demoed, or, more and more companies are talking about their multimodal models. I have to imagine that just triggers like flurry of ideas for your team when you can start to talk to Descript, or Descript can start to take in other forms of interaction from a human, and vice versa. Am I right about that? Are you all really excited about these models?
I think they just overall improve quality. If you're just using text and you're not listening and you're not looking at the pixels, then you can only tell half the story. Like if you're listening and you can hear edit quality, you can hear tonality, you can like things like you can hear sound quality. There's a different set of like you've just really increased the scope of what kind of judgment this AI assistant can have and the ways in which it can be useful.
What about even like the interaction layer? I mean, you mentioned earlier there's nothing more efficient than a Word doc. Like, are we ever going to talk to Descript like it's, an editor, an assistant sitting right next to me? We're working on this thing together in real time. Like, how much of the UI gets abstracted away over time as the AI improves?
When Gen AI arrived, there was this belief that basically the future of UI is going to be a text field or speech, and it's that simple. I don't think it's that simple.
Yeah.
If you're a writer working with an editor, you're not that, like, the tool is good enough that you're not dictating what you want them to do. You're going in and you're putting notes in there yourself, or you're making the edits yourself with the suggest mode. It's sometimes hard to capture in speech the kinds of control and craft that people want to do. So I think that's an important part of the equation, but maybe what makes us different is how focused we are on just reinventing the tool and getting that foundation of a really strong tool figured out.
Maybe let me invert the question then. At what point does AI start to drive the UI? So instead of an assistant going off and doing a thing for me, how much now does AI help make the interface and the experience of Descript dynamic based on what I want it or need it to do? Maybe let me take a step back a little bit. It feels like we're moving towards a world where software interfaces, these things like literally can be dynamic and generated on demand based on the need. Like, do you think about that world at all for Descript, especially for workflows that are so visual and dynamic and based on all these different modalities?
Yeah. Have you seen any examples of that?
No, not in production yet, but I've definitely seen a bunch of examples of like, here, draw this interface on the pane, and like the AI will turn it into a product in real time, right? And then I think about, tools like Devin or, Magic, another one of these automatic coding things. Like, it just seems like we're moving towards a world where like software is going to be dynamic, right? And I just imagine that opens up possibilities for a product like Descript?
I think there's like a literal way to interpret what you're suggesting,
Yeah.
which I don't think is what you're suggesting, which is that, you'll have like a panel with inputs that shift depending on
Yeah.
what's happening. Something like that, like maybe like it seems tricky to do well, because I think ultimately like people really value like knowing where things are and the predictability of tools. But I do think there are some other existing design patterns that one can use, just like suggestions and things like that, that probably get at what you're talking about.
Yeah. Like it could be literally be processing the audio and video in real time and making proactive suggestions just as it's hearing or watching the content. That's pretty interesting, actually. To talk about Underlord, like it seems very all encompassing. And I think it's fairly new. Is that right?
Yeah, Underlord is our take on an AI assistant, because nobody wants a AI overlord, but having an underlord to do your bidding, we could still control it. Seems like it would be a nice thing. So Underlord is a side panel in Descript that kind of houses all of the different types of things that you can delegate. Again, we think of it as like a kind of eager, well-meaning intern. And those are the types of things that it can do. It can do a lot of those like script editing things I was referring to earlier, like removing multiple takes or editing something for clarity. If you ask it to, it can improve sound quality. It can, add chapters or generate show notes or a blog post based on your video, like a bunch of things like that. And the list is growing monthly of the kinds of capabilities it has. We can translate. That's just like our version of Siri or something.
That's really cool. Which of those features do you feel like customers have been more willing to embrace versus maybe the ones that they're not ready to sort of trust and hand the keys over to an AI for?
The ones that are really popular are some of the most boring ones. They're things like create a blog post or create chapters or stuff like that. Like the easy stuff that you could do a week after GPT launched. The stuff around auto editing, some people love, like, and some people have more mixed results with whether it's working. And some of that comes down to like when you're editing people's recordings, do the edits sound good? Do they look good if there's a camera component to it? So I think that's also an area where multimodal is really gonna be helpful.
That makes sense. Do you find in general people, not even with specific features, but do you find in general users are willing to start trusting these things, or is there like an overall hesitancy with leveraging AI for something that is so creative and so personal? So I guess like overall, where do you think the trust level is of consumers with AI inside of Descript?
When we're building new features and we're building new AI features and thinking about how they make it into the product, if this makes sense, like we're thinking about building new knobs and dials for human-shaped hands, and then we build like APIs to let alien-shaped hands control those knobs and dials.
That's cool.
The idea there is that like the AI is just doing things that the human could do if they wanted to, and they can undo them. They can go in and fine tune any decision that the AI has made. It's not kind of like a one shot thing. It's all just going into this tool.
Same knobs. So same knobs for human and alien, just two different sets of hands.
Yeah, the alien is just controlling the human knobs. They're not accessing features that the human can't reach or doing things that the human can't do. And I think that's different than a lot of like what you see in a lot of the point solutions that have come along for video creation, where it's more like just, add a script and we'll give you this fully made slop video, and it doesn't feel like it's good enough, and then there's no recourse from there because you can't really get in and tune it into something that's good enough, where the experience of doing that is so clearly an afterthought. So that's how we've tried to launch these these features in a way that maintains trust, where people can try them, and if they like them, they keep using them. If not, they just use the human version of stuff.
That's really, really smart. And I have to imagine like would actually very much help bridge the gap for people that need to like work up the trust to use these things. I wanted to talk about maybe Detour, if you don't mind. Obviously, Detour was the project you all worked on before leaning into Descript. It was audio walking tour product for cities. Really, really cool product. I wondered about you, like, do you ever think about that product and think about the tools and technologies we have now through AI and think about what you maybe would have done differently or what is now possible that maybe wasn't then?
I don't think about it a lot, but it's hard not to notice that it feels like there's an opportunity to take another swing at that space in the face of Gen AI. And maybe someone's doing this already. I'd kind of be shocked if they weren't. It's a very different product. So the idea of Detour was that we were going to make these like prestige audio tours that were high production value, narrated by the people that knew the city best. And this was like the part of the failure of Detour is just like we could not figure out how to scale content creation. It took 6 months to make a tour and would cost, anywhere from 20 to 30 grand just to make a single tour. And then, when you're giving Apple 30% of everything and just like all the mechanics, it really had like the worst imaginable mechanics as a business, even though it was a special product if you actually went through all the trouble that it took to try it out. But the fundamental idea is like audio tours are sterile and dry and boring, and they could be so much more cinematic and immersive if you take advantage of this like augmented reality mobile phone experience and really invested in getting the storytelling right. The version that would be interesting today is something that's completely generative, right? And it's like completely responsive to where you're going. And I think like it wouldn't be as emotionally profound as what we were creating, but it would definitely tick the box that a lot of people are looking for, which is satisfying curiosity and getting information and some kind of connection to a place. So it's a product that feels like it's worth existing, building, and probably way less niche than Descript because it's so much more scalable.
Everything you said makes sense to me. I do wonder if it actually could be emotional and cinematic, just given how good some of these models are getting. I'm sure you saw.
Yeah.
11 Labs is, licensing all, these personalities from these estates. Imagine you're walking around a certain city and like some famous person associated with that city is like, oh, let me tell you about this building that I used to live in, or I don't know. That just, it could get pretty wild pretty quickly. And then the other thing I think about with Detour is like, I can't remember when you started that, but AirPods were definitely not as ubiquitous.
No, they weren't. Yeah, that would have been great.
And there are cool things you can do with the AirPods.
Yeah, AirPods were this incredible moment where just taking away that tether, taking away that cable, turned headphones, I think for a lot of people, into something that you would bring with you when you needed them. Like when you knew you needed them, to all of a sudden they're just part of your daily carry. Like you always have your AirPods in your pocket along with your wallet and your phone. And that definitely just changed the game for something like Detour, where people can be a little bit more spontaneous.
I'm sure you've also thought of like where some of these devices could end up going. You've probably seen the concepts of the AirPods with the camera on them, or the Orion glasses, which just got demoed from Meta the other day. Like the opportunities seem pretty interesting for a product like this. I'm curious to ask you the same question, but about Groupon. Groupon, a lot of technology didn't exist that exists today when you were building Groupon. And I wonder if AI could have improved that product in some way.
Groupon, I would have fought you kicking and screaming if you made this assertion when I was running Groupon, but it wasn't really a technology company.
Yeah.
It was a glorified blog where we would have a daily post of some cool thing to do. It became more of a technology company over time, where we were doing personalization and a bunch of different, and eventually trying to become like an operating system for local commerce, in a way that I don't know, maybe Square has been the most successful at, but hasn't fully materialized. How would you use AI for?
I have some ideas.
Okay, what do you got?
So, well, the first, like maybe most obvious one is you just mentioned personalization. Obviously, you could leverage machine learning to make the discovery of stuff really, really hyper personalized in a way you probably couldn't back then. But the bigger idea that comes to mind for me, did you see some product just launched called Arcade, where you could literally like describe something via Gen AI and then it'll actually make that physical thing? It's a jewelry thing. I do wonder if you could use Gen AI to almost like do massive multivariate testing around what people would buy. And once you reach that threshold, like however many people you needed to convert a Groupon into an actual sale, then you go and you produce that event or product. Or so basically like you're making up concepts to be sold. And if 100 people say they're interested, then you go and produce them.
Interesting.
Yeah, would be hard to pull off.
I think the tricky thing on personalization and that we ran into, like the thing that broke Groupon was the first version of Groupon was like very simple, one deal per day on something to do in your city. We didn't have multiple deals. We would only have one. And I would say that was always like the version that was most cherished by customers in those early days, because it was all about discovery and putting something in front of you that is not what a personalization algorithm would suggest. And what made it so cool is like, oh my God, there's a like sensory deprivation tank. I never would have thought of doing something like that. You know, now that I see it for 50% off, if I'm ever going to have this experience in life, this sure seems like the right time to make that decision, because I don't know when this is going to come around again. I don't know when I'm going to have this opportunity again. So it created that like urgency around trying something that's outside of your comfort zone. And then what undermined it was the clones and having 40 or 50 different Groupon like deal a days in a city. So now all of a sudden you effectively have a liquid marketplace with a lot of different offerings. And you know that if that sensory deprivation tank goes away, it'll be available on some other site some other day, or in any given day you can get a mani-pedi on one of these sites. Yeah. I do think there's a version of Groupon that could be a really cool business that is still like focused on discovery and one thing per day. If you really kept VCs out of it almost, and like weren't it probably has a limit on how big it can get to make that concept work, but it could be a great lifestyle business. And I don't know, and that's the version where I'm like, I don't know if I would use like how helpful AI would be with that.
Outside of Descript, what's your favorite AI product or feature that you've been using or loving, or at least inspired by?
So there's a note-taking tool that I have been using called Granola. It's similar to what you've seen with like one of those other note-taking assistants, but it works a little different, where it's just recording your computer audio, and in a little like basically document editor, it's taking notes and taking an outline. And it does a couple things that I think are just incredibly clever. One is that you're taking your notes in real time about the call in Granola, just in a blank sheet. And then when the call is done, it goes through and it augments those notes with details. And the outline that it comes up with is like an outline of important bullet points, and then you can drill into it and get verbatims from the actual transcript. It's a really clever idea. And I also just love using products where you're like, God, whoever made this is just good at their job. Like they're just a great, like this is a person that loves products and knows how to make good products. So I just like have a lot of respect for the product chops of the people that made that.
I couldn't agree more. I love it as well. Full disclosure, I'm an investor in the company, so I appreciate you naming it. Andrew, this has been a blast as always. Love talking to you. Thanks so much for doing it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you all so much for listening to Generative Now. If you liked what you heard, please rate and review the podcast. It really does help us. And if you want to learn more, follow Lightspeed at LightspeedVP on YouTube, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Generative Now is produced by Lightspeed in partnership with Pod People. I am Michael Mignano, and we will be back next week with another conversation.